Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. Good evening. I'm Julie Barrett, founder of Conservative Ladies of Washington and Conservative Ladies of America. And we are continuing our virtual tour with our 2024 Conservative Ladies endorsed candidates. And tonight I am joined by Matt Marshall, who is running for House Representatives in the 2nd Legislative District. And Matt is an amazing conservative candidate. I'm so excited that he's running and that we're able to endorse him. He would be a great addition to Olympia to help fight for the things that are most important to conservative ladies of Washington and to our audience, of course, being the First Amendment, Second Amendment, parental rights, education, and the right to life. And so Matt works full time, and so he's joining us right after work, just come in the door. And that's why we're a couple minutes late going live here. But Matt, thank you for being willing to take the time this evening to join us and talk to us about your campaign and what your vision for what you would do in Olympia. So I'm just going to give you the floor here and let you tell people a little bit about who you are, why you're running, maybe a little bit about your background. You have a really diverse background.
Yeah, well, thank you, Julie, and it's my pleasure, my honor to be here. My name is Matt Marshall. I was born and raised in Washington State. I spent time growing up all across the state. So, born in Seattle, moved to Redmond, lived in Yakima, high school in Spokane, lived in Asotin County. When I was active duty military, later on, I moved back for about a 3-year stint. Lived in the Lakewood, Puyallup, and then Puyallup areas while stationed at Fort Lewis. And anyway, right now, I live unincorporated Pierce County out near Eatonville, but it's a Roy post office with Eatonville schools, kind of an odd spot to be out here. But it's beautiful with great conservatives surrounding us. Wife and I settled here because it was a conservative spot in Western Washington for us to raise our children. Got 3 daughters. One is just turned 22, which makes me feel like I am getting quite old. But we also have one daughter entering high school this year as a freshman and one entering middle school. So it's a trying time in the Marshall household right now. Anyway.
Yeah, teenage girls, and especially with it's so I have kids that range from 28 to 18, and I have a stepson that's 20. So during COVID, we had a house full of teenagers. We had one in each grade, and man, I don't think when you and I were growing up, Matt, it was much different than it is today. And you throw those smartphones in there, and it has totally changed the game.
Yeah, it's spending time on the Eatonville school board too. That was my first elected experience, was on the Eatonville school board, and I was elected November 2019. So my very first course of business was trying to navigate COVID shutdowns, maintain my own personal values and ethics while having really crazy state mandates come down that were overreaching, authoritarian, bad for kids, bad for families, bad for education. And I'm just so glad that we're out of that phase. But even in my younger 2 children versus my oldest that graduated the first year of the lockdowns, we've got a lot of work to do still, trying to get the education system back on track and focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic again.
Now, if I can sort of rewind a little bit, why did you run for Eatonville's school board director back in 2019? What was it that inspired you or motivated you to do that?
So I had 3 children all across the spectrum of the grades. When I left the military, I wanted to be involved in my children and families' lives. And one of the things I really wanted to do was be more involved in the schools. I saw that there was a seat on the Eatonville school board that somebody had been appointed to, but it was technically a vacant seat, and thought, why not me? Why not try to be more involved? I really thought that being on a school board in Washington was different than it was. meaning I wanted to be much more involved in curriculum development, school, and really kind of molding what the education system looked like. Unfortunately, with our overreaching superintendent in this state, um, everything that comes to a school board turns the school board into a rubber stamp. And it became a really frustrating endeavor. And then you add the complexity of COVID.
Right.
It was, yeah. But my initial motivation was just to be really involved in my children's lives and their education.
So, did you find, because one of the things that we've seen in just in my short time being involved in Olympia, in the legislation in Olympia, is you have sort of this, as I think it's Senator Hawkins, uh, is I should quote him on this, but it's like the great school board in the sky. You know, Olympia wants to be the school board for all school districts across the state. Did you find the state, the OSPI and the state mandates and regulations to be overriding your constitutional authority as a elected school board member?
100%. There is no doubt. So how it works is OSPI does not pass things through the legislature. They make their own administrative law through their rulemaking process. During COVID, there was no public input to the rulemaking process. And then they would push things out in the form of an unfunded mandated policy. So we were required to adopt. And if we varied too far to the right or left of what they specified in their sample policy, we would then get a threatening letter that our funding was about to be suspended to the school. And one of my most frustrating examples, the one that I like to use as an example of how far they're willing to go to just force the school boards unconstitutionally into following their dictates, was we had an employee on our school board, or a couple of them, that refused to get vaccinated. They refused to ask for a waiver for their vaccination, and they were willing to take unpaid leave, knowing that things would kind of come full circle and then they just pick up their employment later on. Mm-hmm. So it was a happy medium. Never set foot in the school, was not on payroll with the school, but we didn't terminate them. We did not formally fire them. And OSPI and the Attorney General, Bob Ferguson, who's the most dangerous politician in the state of Washington and better not become our governor, right, sent letters to all of us on school board telling us that we must fire those employees. If not, they would come after us civilly, name us as individuals, and seek our personal assets as remedy for the lawsuit. They literally threatened to come after our houses if we did not fire these employees.
Wow. So the employees got fired?
No. Fortunately, we were able to talk with them, and they all voluntarily resigned when they saw how unconstitutional this was and didn't want to put us in that position. Yeah. But thankfully, we had a very conservative board who was all willing to stand up, and we were willing to stick our necks out, knowing it was unconstitutional, and while it might cause some temporary strife, we would ultimately prevail in the court system, even if it had to go to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's crazy how many, and it's not just education, as you're well aware, with the COVID mandates that Ferguson had a lot of people fired. I mean, we saw it with the snowplows, the snowplow drivers on, what was it, I-90 or Highway 2, and couldn't, plow the passes. We've got the ferry workers that, like, that's just become a disaster, and just across the board, it's been so destructive for Washington state. And, one of the things we've seen in the last couple of sessions, they're setting up for another emergency.
And we saw it right before COVID. They passed a constitutional amendment to give the governor this overreaching emergency powers. They passed it as a constitutional amendment, and then it went effective, January 1st, 2020? Mm-hmm. And then he immediately gets to use it?
And I don't know if you've seen the proposed legislation for reforming the emergency powers of the governor. It's all bipartisan, and the the current rendition for this last biennium was also unconstitutional, and it was sponsored by a Republican. And I don't for the life of me understand why, if we're going to go back to the drawing board and reform the governor's emergency powers, why are we still allowing him to make unconstitutional emergency declarations?
He shouldn't be at all. Should not be allowed to. I am disappointed with how the House has been run. That's part of why I'm putting my name in the hat for this position. When I moved to Washington State less than a decade ago, when I moved back out of the military and settled my family here, we had a majority in the House. Mm-hmm. And now we are 1 or 2 seats away from a supermajority for the Democrats.
Yep.
And if you look at the Republican seats that have been lost, most of them have been attacked by other Republicans. Right. And it's really the Republicans have been cannibalizing their own, and they've been going after the most conservative members. And so as we've watched the Democrats march further and further and further left to the extremist progressive left, we're watching the majority of the members of the Republican Party continue to march left with them, to where a lot of the Republicans now are more liberal than Democrats 20 years ago.
Yep. And I think that people go along with it. Other legislators go along with it because the leadership in both the House and the Senate, if you don't go along with them, if you are conservative, if you are not going to go along with what they want, you don't get the same, you don't get the legislative assistant, you don't get all of the resources and tools that the obedient legislators get.
Yeah.
And a lot of people aren't aware of that, about how painful the leadership makes it on the people that won't go along to get along.
Well, let's go even further with Senator Jim McCune.
Yep.
He is an incumbent conservative champion of the people, champion of parent rights, endorsed by your organization. And the Senate caucus is donating to his Republican opponent. Mm-hmm. Why?
Like $15,000, which in a race like that, that's a lot of money.
Luckily, it's going to fall short, but this is money that these caucuses could be spending on swing races, right, on races that we could win that are probably going to go to a Democrat due to lack of funding now.
And, it's funny because before this election cycle happened, in 2022 was the first time that we endorsed candidates as an organization because we're so new. And this cycle, we decided, you know what, we don't want to endorse candidates where it's a Republican primarying another Republican, because we don't want the caucus, we don't want HROC spending their money on Republican against Republican. We want them to spend that money somewhere else. And maybe if we just kind of, sit back, they won't do that. You're running for an open seat. This is JT Wilcox is vacating the seat. So it's an open seat. And so when we saw this, we were like, well, fair game. If it's an open seat, we're going to get behind the conservative candidate. But of course, Jim's seat is not an open seat. Jim is the incumbent, and they're pushing a very moderate candidate into that seat, who lost actually to Jim in 2020 when he ran the first time for that seat. And it's so discouraging for the average citizen who's trying to get in the fight and trying to make their voice heard, to see that the Republicans, the people who are supposed to be on our side, supposed to be on our team, are sabotaging the efforts of really good legislators and really good candidates.
Yeah, it's part of what's motivating me to run is not just to be able to change with the legislation, but we have to do something about the leadership in the House and Senate, because we need to be positioning ourselves to where we are spending money effectively. This money is coming from somewhere. This is coming from the people because they have things they want done. And if we're sabotaging ourselves before we can even do legislation, we need We need to change the leadership so we can put ourselves in a position to pass legislation, or at least have an effective voice to oppose it in a manner that's effective, so we don't just have it, super majority shoved at us with zero ability to even slow it down.
Right. And I think, be curious what you think about this. I think a lot of it has to do with messaging. And I think the GOP, not just in Washington, but all over the country, the GOP sucks at messaging. And they have no real meaningful delivery system to the citizens and the voters for here's what's going on, here's what these bills mean. We need you to, use your voice and get involved and speak up about these things. The Republicans are really quiet. The Democrats, what I've seen with my engagement in the legislature is they've got like a line out the door of people to testify on every single bill. Every single bill. They're very organized. And of course, they have a lot more money, but there's a lot that could be done as far as messaging. And so it kind of feels like the opposition party, the Republicans, like, do they even care?
Well, some of them do, but they're told to not participate.
Pipe down.
Yes. And, I have signed up probably 100 times to testify, and I'm always told no. Uh, I've never been allowed to testify. And honestly, it discourages a person when they keep trying to give their own testimony. And it's because I'm known, at least to the legislators, as a gun rights activist, and they don't look at the rest of what I've done. When I'm trying to talk about COVID mandates, I'm speaking as 22 years in healthcare. I have my own medical license, my own DEA license. I practice orthopedic surgery as a physician assistant. Have been doing that for well over a decade. My first real job in the military was working in a lab. Specialty was immunohematology, specifically the kinds of thing I did virology research in the military. And here I'm told I'm not qualified to give comment in the House on anything about the COVID mandates and lockdowns. It's frustrating because our own side does not use the tools available to them.
Right.
When we have people that know how to message, people that can have their voice out there, yourself included, that can get the message out to a large number of people, rather than supporting them, encouraging them, bringing them in, the party shuts them out and shuts them up, and then makes personal attacks to destroy them, to try to discourage other people with a voice from even opening their mouth. And this is where the Democrats win, is they use all of their diversity and various voices to be a force multiplier to get the message out. And then they try to unify the message. So it's all going out maybe in different versions, but in a way that enhances each other and gets to more voters. We don't do that.
Right.
And it's a problem, and we're going to continue to lose until we can start encouraging rather than just destroying each other, even if we disagree on small issues.
Yeah, I've actually had, I know that leadership has told legislators not to talk to me and not to talk to people in Conservative Ladies of Washington, it's so discouraging because we're just citizens that are trying to change things in the state for the good of the state. And we want to help legislators, but we also want truth and accountability. And it seems like there's a large number of people in politics that don't want that. And so that's what makes candidates like yourself and people who are bold and courageous and not afraid to speak truth and are willing to be accountable to the people. I wish we had hundreds more of you, because it's such a rare thing to have such a great candidate like yourself. Let's talk about, you mentioned that you are a gun rights activist, and a lot of our viewers and our audience are very concerned about what's going on with the Second Amendment in Washington. Can you talk a little bit about where things are at and where you see things could go, maybe even in bad bills that you think are coming up that need to be resisted and opposed, Because kind of at this point we're all holding the line, right? You can't come in there with a great policy and they're going to pass it. So
Well, unfortunately, I think that our best recourse currently is going to be lawfare, and we do have some things that are working in that realm. Until we start winning more House seats and getting ourselves closer to at least a 50-50 split in the House and Senate, we're going to continue to see bad gun bills be passed, and we're going to have to fight them in the courts. We could try to run the initiative route, which has worked a little bit with Brian Haywood's group. But unfortunately, I think that any gun bill that gets pushed right now is gonna make it to the finish line. And if we have a Bob Ferguson Attorney General, it's just going to be signed into law without any question. I think that the recent Supreme Court decision on Chevron is going to be a huge benefit to us by limiting some of the restrictions on the Second Amendment. I'm hoping that we can get a new Supreme Court justice or two over the next few years, which would be helpful because Washington is a very liberal Supreme Court. And then getting things escalated to the U.S. Supreme Court, because we still have like even our magazine ban that's made it, I believe it's made it to the Ninth Circuit, but we've got to get them across to the Supreme Court to be overturned. I know it's not the answer being a gun rights activist, but I'm frustrated and I'm concerned about all the bad bills coming. And outside of lawfare and having a strong U.S. Supreme Court and hoping that limiting of administrative laws will help us, I don't know that we have the best path forward other than just don't comply.
right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of I always hear people with it seems like every bill, I'll have people comment on it and they're like, that's unconstitutional. Yes, it is. Most every bill that comes out of Olympia is unconstitutional, but they know they've got the courts, and they know it takes a lot of money and resources to do these lawsuits, and so they just kind of flood the system with all these unconstitutional laws, and there's really no chance for people to fight back.
And that's where, if we get Pete Serrano as Attorney General, we would have at least a really good senior law enforcement officer
Yes.
on our side. And this is the motivating factor for me to go to law school. So once we're off this call, I'm actually going to go take my last law school exam of this semester. And then in 2 weeks, I'm starting my final semester of law school with a focus in constitutional and administrative law.
That is awesome. So everybody needs to know that you are like a working man, you're a student, you're a father, you do all these things, and you're still willing to spend the time and the energy to serve your state. You've already served your country, and continue to do so, which I think is just absolutely admirable. And we should all be so grateful that there are people like you willing to do this. So I want to let you go shortly so that you can, because I know you've got to get to your family and you've got to get to school, but I have a few more things that I want to cover with you, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I want to ask you, because with your school board background and education is such a huge piece. I truly believe that if we can't fix what's happening to our children, not just in school, this education system is really just the breeding ground for the left agenda to harm the children, right? And to create this society of people that is, communist, really. I mean, let's face it, let's just say it for what it is. And so I think education is to me, it's probably the number one priority. And I think maybe some people just don't understand, aren't there yet. But I know with your inside view and also being a parent, especially of teenagers. And then we've got this Title IX stuff that's come out of the Biden administration, which I'm sure that Bob Ferguson and all the Democrats in Washington are just like, woo, this is great. So they won't have any resistance to that. We've seen at least one school board in Washington State, it's Kennewick School Board, made a resolution that they are not going to follow the new Title IX what do you
Mandate.
regulations. Yeah. So they're not doing that. Boys cannot compete on girls' sports, and boys cannot go into girls' private spaces. Um, what are your thoughts? I mean, as you know, because you were at you participated in the uh, protest rally that we did in Olympia against 5599 at the end of the last year's session. So you're well versed in exactly what's going on there. Um, what do you see that you and the conservative legislators could do to? Is there anything that you see in as your priority in kind of addressing some of this stuff?
Well, a lot of Democrats don't want to talk about it, but I do like to make a distinction between a person who runs as a Democrat and a far left radical.
Mm-hmm.
And the pendulum is swinging. And I think if we were to approach a bipartisan bill to limit stuff, especially around children, I think that we have enough support with Democrats that are not far left radicals, that are more on the moderate side, to prevent any further bills and potentially even pass bills to make sure that we maintain a respectful environment for people that choose to live a certain way, but ensure that we have fairness and equality. Title IX was designed to give women an equal chance for competition, for education, for sporting, for
Mm-hmm.
it was designed to give women an equal chance, and then modifying it in a way to where biological men can now compete in the sports is completely upending the whole intent of Title IX when it began. And that's angering people on both sides of the aisle. It's just it's not something that's going to get media attention in Washington, because that's not what the far left progressive radicals in the media are going to allow to be out in public. But there's some pretty good polling that it is a populist ideal to not have men competing against women. The other part of this that I'm really enjoying seeing is the medical agencies, the American College of Pediatrics, a lot of the European health societies are coming out and saying that hormone blockers, puberty blockers, transitioning is not only not providing the desired effect, it's actually a detriment to these children. And they're
Yes.
recommending that we do not do any of this and instead put them into intensive mental health treatment, which is really the underlying cause of a lot of this. And if you're not old enough to get a tattoo, in fact, I looked this up the other day talking with my wife. I've got tattoos. I waited till I was 18 because it's the law.
Right.
It is a crime. It is a felony in the state of Washington to apply a tattoo to any person under the age of 18. Yet, without parent consent, the state of Washington is going to allow a medical provider to break the Hippocratic Oath and cause detriment to a child who
Yeah.
they're saying is not old enough and mentally mature enough to make a decision about ink in their skin, but is allowed to change their gender, potentially sterilize themselves permanently. It just doesn't pass the common sense test. And from talking with a lot of people at both the liberal law school that I'm going to, as well as that are Democrats in Olympia, this is not something that's widely supported. And I think that we do have the ability to pass legislation that would prevent touching of minor children.
Yeah, I forget who it was. I don't know if it was Phil Fortunato or Jim McCune. Might have even been Cindy Jacobson or Jim Walsh. I don't know. It was somebody put forth a bill that would protect children from, I think it was Jim Walsh actually, that would protect children under the age of 18 from any kind of surgery or things like that. A bill that we requested last session is called the Given Name Act, and it was sponsored by Senator Patton and McCune. And basically, it's a very simple bill. It requires that schools call a child by their given name, unless the parent has given permission for the school to call the child something else. Now, this seems like something that would be bipartisan, but it made the list of the LGBTQ caucus's anti-LGBTQ bills. But I'm curious, is this something that you would be willing to sponsor on the House side when you're
Yeah,
elected?
without question, that's a very easy one to get behind. Again, it's parents' rights and parents' involvement in making sure they're informed. OSPI, again, with their tyrannical and constitutional dictates, tried to pass a model policy and tried to push it at us. It's one of the first policies that came down when I was on school board, saying that we were not allowed to notify parents of change in pronouns or change in names, and their reasoning was it could be dangerous to the child. And this is the first thing that we pushed back to our attorneys on the school board and amended, so that our policy would read, unless there is an assessed harm to the child, parents would be notified before any of this was honored. The first thing that would be done is the counselor, the principal, the parents, and the child would have a meeting. And it's bringing the parents back into the loop. And what we noticed was we didn't have this issue in our school district. It wasn't a problem because now the parents were involved, and it was how things should be. If a child is going through a tough time, you bring in mental health care,
Yeah.
and you bring in the parents, and you try to figure out what's going on and provide a good solution. And we never had to worry about any kind of a harm to a child, because again, if we're assessing harm to a child, we're supposed to be notifying authorities that we believe there's an abuse situation with a child, and we have a duty to report. So it almost made the policy as we adopted a non-issue. But passing legislation, of course I'm going to support it, because a parent should be the primary nurturer, the person that's responsible for the education, the upbringing, the morals, the values of the child. It should not be instilled or indoctrinated into a child through a public school system of liberal teachers that are not the parent. That's just wrong in so many ways.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And so I'm glad that you would help champion that, because we are hoping that will get that we can run that again and see if it can get some traction. Because I think that's like you said, it's just a parents' rights issue. It's not a political issue. I'm trying to reframe the way I say parents' rights, because I actually believe that it should be children's rights, because children have a right to be protected by their parent. So it's not my right to my child so much as it is my child's right to be protected by me, because I'm the best person to protect my children. So I'm glad to know that. And I want to tell our audience, I'm not asking you a lot of policy and position questions, because number one, I already know that we align. And number two, I could ask you, what bills would you want to write? But you and I both know that in Olympia, with the Democrats having the majority, if you were to, write a bill, the chances of it even, moving to a committee hearing are slim to none. And so you understand that you're really just at this point going in to hold the line and to start building more conservatives, picking up more seats in the legislature. And so I really want people to understand that and manage people's expectations that we are in a majority. And so we want to send people like Matt to Olympia to vote no on all these bad bills, and while we continue to try to pick up seats and get citizens engaged and involved. But I do, with that said, Matt, do you want to share some of your platform issues and some of the things that you are passionate about? Because I might know, but our audience doesn't know.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of them. First, I'm going to say going to law school is going to be instrumental, because I don't need to depend on the bill writers that are employed by the Republican caucus. I'll be able to write and draft my own bills. One of the benefits of that is none of these are going to initially be that I write are going to initially be coming from the House Republicans before they're brought up to see if we can get them in front of a committee. I'll be able to write a bill and give it to a moderate Democrat on the other side of the aisle, let them put their name on it as sponsor and let it go through their side and have it never have touched other Republicans. And being able to do that is going to immediately give us a better chance at hearings, at potentially getting through, even with some amendments. But that's just a different angle that I have not seen other Republican colleagues try to use, because everything comes through the House bill writers.
And they want their name on a bill. They want to be able to say, I passed a bill. And that's not strategic in Washington.
No. And if there's no Republican name on a bill, but it's a good bill, it's going to be really easy for us to get behind it. Or maybe we can get one or two Republicans to co-sponsor something that's sponsored by 10 Democrats. Now we've got a bipartisan bill that's based on, children's issues and education issues. So that's one avenue that I plan to use on various bills that are populist, that are right, that are morally correct, that the people overwhelmingly want. Other things that just make sense is we need to hold our prosecutors accountable for just letting everybody out. Right now, we've got crime problems, we've got safety problems. Businesses are going under because they're watching their inventory just walk out the front door with no repercussions. If you or I get pulled over for speeding, we're going to get cited. We're going to pay our fine, maybe challenge it in court if we don't think we deserve it, but we're still getting a ticket, and we're probably going to slow down a little bit next time. If you walk into a store in downtown Seattle or downtown Olympia, or maybe even in Yelm, and you steal less than $500 in merchandise and walk out the door, even if you get arrested, you probably are going to keep your merchandise, spend not even 10 minutes in jail, have no fine, and be released as soon as you're booked. And you're going to go do it again because there are no repercussions. I was asked by an Olympian, I'll call him in quotation marks, journalist, today on the phone. So I said that exact thing. And his first response was, so you think that we should make, what is a misdemeanor theft into a felony now? It's like, no, that's not what I said. I said that we need to make sure that we actually hold people accountable. So there is a reason, there is a deterrence to the crime and the theft. So one is enabling police. We have the lowest number of police per capita of any state in the United States. We have a terrible recruitment issue because we demonized police during 2020 in the summer of love. And first, we need to allow them to do their job. Second, we need to make sure that there's a positive idea of the police in our state. We need to stop crime in this state, but it starts not with passing new laws and passing new bills. It's enabling them to do their jobs. And we had a start with the initiative process, but it's still not where it needs to be. And my next step is going to be holding liberal, progressive prosecutors accountable for unilaterally applying the law based on a political manner, because we've watched it happen from January 6th and then the recent protests at the Capitol. There is a different response if you are a conservative believing in conservative ideas versus if you're progressive and believing in the liberal ideals. And so that's one of the things I really want to champion, is making sure we take politics out of law enforcement and make sure that we have our laws enforced. We probably don't need any new laws. There's so many on the books that it's just ridiculous. But I guess I'll stop rambling here. Law enforcement, decreasing taxes, auditing the budget. The school funding system is completely broken, having been on the school board. And unfortunately, all this money is going to all of these liberal policies and this liberal agenda instead of reading, writing, and arithmetic. And it's not going to the students. And then the schools are still underfunded, especially in conservative districts. And then we're having to pass levies just to be able to keep schools afloat. And then places like Yelm fail to pass their levy. Now they're going through massive layoffs. and all these essential services for the children are not going to be there because the state's not funding them properly. And we were all promised, both back when the lottery passed, the lottery bills passed, and then the marijuana bills passed, that we were going to have all of this money go to education and roads. Unfortunately, it's dumped into the general fund, and none of this money ends up, not none of it, but a great majority of it's diverted away from education and away from roads, and now our children are suffering, and it's there's so much work to be done.
There is. I mean, there's like, where do you start? And I was saying last night, I was talking, I had Brandon Bynan on last night. And we were talking, it's like you're turning the Titanic. And so people need to understand that this is not just like a switch that you're going to flip and things are going to get better. It is, many, many years of a process to get, sorry, my cat just scratched my leg. Many years to get Washington back into a place of sanity and common sense. And, it starts with candidates like yourself. What I think you're such a great candidate, and it makes me so excited to hear you talk, and I just it gives me hope. It's encouraging. So let's talk about your campaign and what you need, because we have a lot of our audiences in deep blue areas of Washington State, and so one of the things we've been trying to encourage them to do is adopt a conservative. Whether, if it's we're already in the session, find a conservative that you can communicate with, that you can support, that you can pray for, that you can get behind, or a candidate like yourself. So if someone's in, say, Bothell, they could support you. So what do you need from people to get you over the finish line in this primary, to get you to win the primary so that you move on to the general?
Well, I guess the thing all candidates always say is money, but I'm not asking for that, actually, which is a non-typical thing for a candidate. I did very well fundraising early on. Unfortunately, some of the less conservative people that don't want a strong conservative to get elected have gone after my Republican opponent and injected a large sum of money, but that just showed up this week, and ballots have been out for a week. So I'm actually not concerned about that. I've had some mailers. We've door knocked over 20,000 houses.
Wow.
We had a Washington State Republican Party actually sent a mailer on my behalf, which was amazing.
Wonderful.
And then we've had a few waves of text messages go out. I've got 250 signs out throughout and not just, I don't do the small yard signs. They're 2 foot by 4 foot or 4 foot by 8 foot signs. I've got 250 of them out, all on private property and or businesses that have asked for them. So my campaign is going very, very well currently.
Good.
What I could use is support on social media. I was completely banned off of social media with the exception of X after Elon bought it. Outside of X, I have zero social media presence because I am permanently lifetime banned for speaking conservative topics. I had never even received a warning, but now I'm permanently banned. It's a little bit frustrating, especially when I used to have 1 million person per week
Yeah.
reach on Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. We can definitely help you with that. And I know you and I already had a conversation about that. And I had like life crises blow up on me, I think, shortly after that. And I completely forgot about that. So let's you and I touch base on that, and we'll make sure that we get that happening for you. In addition to that, what is there anything else? I have your it's marshall4wa.com. And I'm sure that donations are still great, right? If you live in district, maybe get a sign. I mean, after probably kind of late right now because the primary is on Tuesday.
Yep. Talk to neighbors. If you're in the second or you know anybody in the second district, make sure that the people you know are voting for myself, voting for Jim McCune, and make sure they vote. It's hugely important. Right now, Pierce County side, I checked last night, it was 9% return for the second legislative district. And that's terrible.
Really low. Really low.
We also have 2 Democrats in our race. So there's 4 candidates in this race right now. My assumption is that I'll move on along with one of the Democrats, but making sure everybody votes, that's important.
Yeah. So if you guys have those ballots on your countertops or wherever you have your ballots, please fill it out and get it into a Dropbox ASAP. Make sure everyone in your household who is eligible to vote is filling out their ballot, and get that in a Dropbox. And like Matt said, you want to vote for Matt and Jim McCune in the 2nd legislative district. We haven't really released, we're not really drilling down too far into the local levels. We're really focusing on the legislative races, because we do need to pick up seats, or we at the very least need to hold what we have, which is a very, we're already at a deficit. And so we cannot afford to lose a seat. And having Matt, I actually see this as a Republican pickup, Matt, if you win this seat, because Wilcox he was always vote off. I shouldn't say always, but very often he would vote with the Democrats. And so this would be actually a huge pickup for the Republican side and for people like myself who are conservative voters and thinkers. So please head over to his website, marshallforwa.com, to learn more about Matt. You can also drop a few bucks into the campaign if you feel up to it, but make sure you vote. Election day is Tuesday, August 6th. You need to get those. I know we've said in the past, hold it until election day, but now we're asking people to get those ballots in as soon as possible. And that tells the candidates, like Matt is saying, there's only 9%. It tells them kind of where things are at and what kind of work needs to be done. So if you would get those ballots in, that would be a huge help to the campaign. Matt, thank you for joining us after your busy day. And I know you've got a busy evening ahead, and appreciate you being willing to get in the fight and get your hands dirty and serve on behalf of the citizens of Washington. And we would love to have you back again before the general if you're up for it.
Oh, absolutely. I'll be back. Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to continuing the fight in Olympia.
Awesome. Thank you. Good night, everybody.